I'm watching the wind blow. The idea of a tree in my mind is that it never moves, that it's patient. Somehow it doesn't change. But I'm watching it move. And it's moving even in a way that I cannot watch. And that fundamentally it probably has seen more of the sky than I ever will. As it rotates on a planet around a sun, it has probably noticed more of space than I ever will. And that in the end, relatively speaking, the amount that I've traveled compared to the amount the tree travels is probably about the same. What is a tree? What am I? Once I thought, why should I be one-sided? Therefore I was initiated into the Vaishnavism in Vrindavan, and I took the garb of a Vaishnava monk. I spent 3 days practicing the Vaishnava discipline. Again at Dakshineshwar, I was initiated into the mystery of Rama worship. I painted my forehead with a long mark. I put a string on with a diamond around my neck. But after a few days, I gave them up. A certain man had a tub. People came to him to have their clothes dyed. That tub contained a solution of dye, whatever color a man wanted for his cloth. He would get it by dipping the cloth into the tub. One man was amazed to see this and said to the dyer, "Please give me the dye that you have in your tub." Was the master hinting that people professing different religions would come to him and have their spiritual consciousness awakened according to their own ideals? Who are you? Who am I? You see me sitting here in a room. What assumptions are you making? How are you defining me? Who am I? And what determines that? What things do I borrow to say what I'm allowed to be? How do I set the rules for myself? How do you set the rules for yourself? What are you allowed to investigate? What are you allowed to see? Look at these beautiful dresses in the art museum. Who do they represent? What defines them? You look at them and you say, oh, the fabric is distinctly African. But then you look closely at the design, you're like, well, that's Victorian aristocracy. And then you find out that the artist, this Yinko Shonibari, was from Lagos. And he designed these beautiful dresses to make a statement about identity, about essentialism, about what we are and who we are, what we're allowed to be. In the article that I read about him, it says this: the epiphany came at a street market in Brighton, where Shonibari was talking to a vendor of batik fabrics. He had first come across these colorful textiles as a child in Lagos, growing up during the decade after Nigerian independence. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, they were adopted all over West Africa by those who wanted to distinguish themselves from Westerners in their attire. But the fabrics themselves are of Indonesian origin. From the 19th century onwards, they were mass-produced by Dutch companies, hence their other name, Dutch wax fabric, and sold in vast quantities across Africa. The sign of African independence, Shonibari discovered on that day in Brighton, is something that was actually designed in Indonesia and fabricated in Europe. How do we determine an identity? The end line of what the master says in his story about the dye in the dye bucket is that after a few days he gave them up. He threw them away. He understood that all identities come from that one identity, that all identities are an expression of that one identity in all of its color, in all of its diversity, in all of its wonder. Every one that you see is but a color of the divine, a manifestation of mother, of father, of brother, of sister, of lover, of wife, of husband. All of us in that essence our only love.